A new UFO mystery over the Nevada desert, and this time, pictures of the strange objects were captured by none other than the U.S. Air Force.
For more than a century, extraterrestrial encounters have been reported across different countries. Some were witnessed by civilians.
I don't know, but everybody stopped to see the aliens.
Others by military personnel.
She saw a little creature that was really sweating. There was like a little person but with no hair whatsoever, red eyes and 3 horns. She pointed to the other girls and started running the other way.
This video is a sequence of incidents and historical records that suggest these events may not be isolated, but part of an ongoing situation pointing to the presence of aliens on Earth.
So what are you doing here now?
But before we start, subscribe to the channel, because the footage you're about to see is only for people willing to face what's really out there. In January of 2023, during what should have been a routine training mission over the Gulf of Mexico, a U.S. Air Force pilot operating inside restricted airspace connected to Eglin Air Force Base reported something that didn't behave the way objects are supposed to behave in one of the most heavily monitored regions in the country. According to the Pentagon's own statement, the pilot's radar initially detected 4 separate objects, moving at altitudes between 16,000 and 18,000 feet, arranged in a loose formation. Only one of them was visually confirmed, but that single object was enough to trigger a chain of irregularities that would later reach Congress. The pilot described a rounded craft with a conical top, unlike anything scheduled to be in the range that day.
When you're on a test mission, you're supposed to have clear airspace, not supposed to be anything that shows up. And they saw a sequence of 4 craft in a clear diamond formation for which there is a radar sequence that I alone have observed in the United States Congress.
As the aircraft closed in, both radar and infrared systems reportedly malfunctioned. Post-flight maintenance could not provide a clear explanation. The incident was logged, classified, and quietly shelved. Months later, Representative Matt Gaetz revealed that his office had been shown imagery and sensor data after initially being denied access.
Several months ago, my office received a protected disclosure from Eglin Air Force Base indicating that there was a UAP incident that required my attention. I sought a briefing regarding that episode and brought with me Congressman Burchett and Congresswoman Luna. We asked to see any of the evidence that had been taken by flight crew in this endeavor and to observe any radar signature as well as to meet with the flight crew. We were not afforded access to all of the flight crew, and initially we were not afforded access to images and to radar.
Stating on record that the object did not resemble known U.S. or adversarial technology. The Pentagon would later label the object a lighting balloon, but only with moderate confidence, while leaving the sensor failures unresolved. One confirmed object, restricted airspace, system interference, an explanation that doesn't fully close the file. And this is where the story widens, because incidents like this didn't begin in 2023, and they didn't begin at Roswell either. Long before modern radar, similar encounters were already being recorded, just described very differently. In late 1896, newspapers across the United States began publishing remarkably similar reports of bright lights moving deliberately through the night sky. These weren't described as meteors or stars. Editors compared them to machines. Over the following months, sightings spread from California across the Midwest, forming what would later be called the mystery airship wave of 1896 to 1897. In Sacramento, crowds watched a glowing object hover for nearly an hour, changing direction abruptly, illuminating the ground below. Papers like the Sacramento ran illustrations showing a structured craft, cigar-shaped, sometimes fitted with propeller-like features. Multiple witnesses described beams of light sweeping the terrain in a way that felt intentional rather than accidental. What made these reports unsettling wasn't a single dramatic claim, but their consistency. Independent accounts separated by hundreds of miles. This was decades before any aircraft capable of sustained flight existed. Publicly, figures like Theodore Roosevelt dismissed the phenomenon as mass confusion. Privately, he acknowledged the reports were difficult to reconcile with known technology, especially since many sightings appeared to follow rail lines and industrial hubs. The phenomenon didn't disappear, it simply stopped being discussed that way. And as aviation and radar emerged, these encounters didn't end. They moved from newspapers into military files, including those quietly recorded far beyond American borders, deep inside Soviet airspace. During the Cold War, similar reports began surfacing on the opposite side of the world, quietly embedded inside Soviet military archives and state-controlled media, often ignored in the West because of where they came from. By the late 1960s, the Soviet Union was already collecting material related to unexplained aerial encounters. Some of it wouldn't surface publicly for decades. Among the most controversial pieces to emerge much later were short segments of footage allegedly recorded inside restricted facilities, showing what officials claimed was a non-human entity under observation. The imagery is grainy, the context unclear, and the provenance heavily debated. But what unsettled researchers wasn't the visual quality, it was the implication that such recordings were treated as routine documentation rather than spectacle. After the USSR fell apart, some wild stories from the Roswell days started popping up in Eastern Europe. People began sharing tales about medical teams being told to help a seriously injured alien found after a crash, kept alive for a short time in a controlled environment. These stories didn't come out as official announcements, but more like bits and pieces that slipped through as old records became available. There was never any solid proof or straight-up denials about what happened. Then came another layer, footage that appeared to show a non-human entity engaged in what looked like a structured interview, responding calmly, almost cooperatively. Unlike earlier material, this portrayal wasn't chaotic or clinical. It suggested interaction, observation, and exchange.
Okay, yesterday you told us you traveled, and I quote, thousands of light years to get here. Yes. Tell us the truth, or the word, or another meaning. It is truth. So I take it aliens took over our future, right? So you're human. Okay, so you evolved from us. So what are you doing here now? How?
Whether authentic or not, the consistency in how these claims were described across decades raised attention among analysts rather than enthusiasts. What's striking is not any single clip or story, but the continuity, military involvement, medical oversight, controlled environments, language that implies custody rather than discovery. And these claims weren't isolated to Russia or the former Soviet sphere. As similar accounts began surfacing in Western countries, the narrative shifted again away from objects in the sky and toward reported encounters with something described not as technology, but as a presence. As those old military claims started to fade away into dusty files and random leaks, the way people talked about encounters began to shift again. It wasn't about the secrecy level anymore, but rather about how close these things were showing up. And instead of government officials capturing these events, it was everyday folks out there with their phones, snapping pics and videos when they probably weren't even supposed to. One of the creepier situations came out of Miami. After some footage showed this weird, tall figure during a wild police scene, people got curious for a bit, but then everything just went quiet. The person who first recorded and shared the video reportedly got picked up by the authorities without much fuss. After that, there were no updates, no statements, and he just sort of disappeared.
Tonight, we address a story that has been clouded in secrecy. We've attempted multiple times to bring you details about an ongoing federal investigation involving a New York resident named Fitz. However, the Pentagon and the Department of Homeland Security have denied us permission to report in full. What we can confirm is that Fitz was present at the Bayside Marketplace on January 1st, where he allegedly witnessed something classified.
No corrections were made and no clarifications were given. The whole story didn't blow up. It just faded away, leaving behind a feeling that it was more planned than just a coincidence. In other places, things were a lot calmer. Back in 2011, some drivers near a small town in Mexico spotted this glowing blue object just hovering above the highway. It didn't zoom around or anything. It just stayed put, almost like it was watching over the area before it slowly floated away. The witnesses didn't feel scared. They were more like puzzled, that kind of confusion that sticks with you long after it's all over. Then a video came out that was totally not filmed outside. It showed some uniformed officers listening to a serious briefing about encounters with different non-human beings. The vibe was all business, not just speculation. People online immediately started reacting, and it wasn't about whether these beings were real or not, but rather why there would even be a briefing like this in the first place.
Draw a small gray.
Small gray.
These the aliens that you seen?
That is not gray. No, but
Which ones did you see?
the alien ones or not?
They look like reptiles, not gunmen.
This is a very bad drawing, but
This
looks pretty good to me.
How tall are those right there?
These guys right here,
Yeah.
and they're all humanoids. They both walk on two legs. They all walk on two legs.
Well, I don't want to that thing.
And this thing right here is huge.
One clip added an interesting twist. It showed some old, grainy footage of a guy who looked like a scientist shaking hands with a non-human figure. It didn't seem like a big discovery, more like they already knew each other. There was no chaos or panic, just a handshake that felt a bit too familiar. The fact that this footage was old made it even creepier, suggesting that this wasn't a new thing at all. Not every strange encounter was quiet, though. Back in 1996, the Brazilian town of Varginha got wrapped up in one of the most talked about cases ever. Locals reported seeing a metallic object crash into the hills nearby, followed by sightings of small, weird creatures roaming around. The military showed up quickly, sealing off areas before anyone could take a good look. The official stories kept changing, but the town never really bounced back to normal. The whole incident still feels like a fresh wound, not something that's been resolved.
She saw a little creature that was really sweating. There was like a little person, but with no hair whatsoever, red eyes and 3 horns. She pointed to the other girls and started running the other way.
Similar stories popped up in China years later, where a quiet, structured object floated over a busy area, moving deliberately before it just vanished without a sound. No debris, no follow-up, just some footage and a bunch of unanswered questions. But you know what? What you've seen so far isn't the whole story. We've got stories to back all this up too. Not documents, not footage, but people who claim to have been inside the system long before these discussions became public. But before that, please consider subscribing to this channel so you won't miss anything. One of the most controversial was Phil Schneider, a man who presented himself not as a researcher or commentator, but as a former government contractor with engineering clearance on classified underground projects. Throughout the early 1990s, Schneider gave public talks describing work on deep, subterranean bases across the United States, places he said were never meant to exist in the public record.
We built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground. When I saw Green Beret and Black Beret people encamped inside of our geologist camp, I knew something was up. The gig was up. First of all, I knew all about the alien agenda.
According to Schneider, one project in particular stood apart. In 1979, while assisting with excavation work beneath Dulce, New Mexico, his team allegedly breached a section of the facility that wasn't listed on any plans. What followed, he claimed, was not confusion, but confrontation. Schneider described encountering non-human entities underground and a violent exchange involving military personnel. He later displayed severe scars during lectures, attributing them to injuries sustained during the incident. His account went further. Schneider alleged that dozens of personnel were lost that day, with no official acknowledgement and no surviving public record. He claimed the site wasn't simply military, but a shared operation involving non-human intelligence tied to research programs far beyond conventional weapons development. Over time, his speeches shifted from technical descriptions to warnings.
According to Phil Schneider, the Dulce base was almost like a nightmarish Frankenstein's type lab.
That secrecy itself had become the real danger, and that governments were withholding information not for protection, but for control.
Well, to our total surprise, first of all, the government knew all about it.
But perhaps what made Schneider's story so unsettling wasn't just what he said, but how he met his fate. In 1996, he was found lifeless in his Oregon apartment. The official cause was ruled suicide, yet the details raised more questions than answers. He was discovered with a surgical tube tightly wound around his neck, but friends claimed he could barely use his hands due to an accident. Many believe his demise was a silencing of a man who knew too much. Whether Schneider was exposing classified truth or constructing a personal mythology remains unresolved. What matters is this: his testimony fits into a larger pattern. Insiders claiming contact, cooperation, and concealment, and then disappearing from the narrative entirely. And when all of this is placed side by side, the restricted airspace encounters, the historical sightings, the military reports, the leaked footage, and the testimonies, a pattern begins to form that's difficult to ignore. Not proof of visitors, but evidence of management, of incidents contained, language softened, and narratives quietly redirected. The question may no longer be whether something unusual is here, but how long it's been integrated into our world without acknowledgement. Because if these encounters were meaningless, they wouldn't be buried so carefully. And if nothing ever landed, then no one would have needed to stay silent for this long. If you like this video, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and don't forget to share your thoughts down below.